out. In the interest of economy, and also because I'm sure you guys are much more interesting than anything I'm going to say about you, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves to our group. Let's do a quick lightning round of intros, maybe like 30 seconds apiece. Who you are, where you're from, how you got there. And I also wouldn't mind a word about kind of where your role came from, because in some cases I know some of your roles are actually quite new or quite interesting. So let's start there. James, do you want to kick us off? We'll just go down the row.
So I'm James Desjardins. I'm the Associate Director of Practice Technology at Cravath here in New York. Before that, I was an associate at Cravath in the corporate department for a number of years doing M&A and capital markets of the type that Cravath is known for. Prior to that, I was a software engineer and I'm an electrical engineer by training. My role came about 2 years ago through a happy series of coincidences internally, but long story short, I was lucky enough to be connected with our CIO and our head of KM, essentially, who were very open-minded about creating a new role. They didn't really know what it was for or what its objectives were, but they had a vague sense that something needed to change, and I was able to convince them that I had some views on which direction in particular they ought to change, and so here we are.
Hi, Monet Fauntleroy. I'm a Senior Manager of Practice Innovation at White & Case. Before that, spent time in knowledge management at Cooley and MoFo. Before that, was with Jeroen at Practical Law, prior to and during some of the Thomson Reuters time. And before that, did my time in the trenches in e-discovery and started out my legal life as a trial lawyer. I have been at White & Case since January. The role sort of sprung from the need to kind of allow folks to focus full-time on the R&D of AI and emerging technologies for the firm. And so they had a really great team of folks who were doing it in their spare time. But as you know, lawyers don't have a lot of that. And so our CKO kind of recognized the need to build a team, cornered me almost a year ago at the ARC conference, and kind of bullied me into the job. If you know O's, his bullying is very well-meaning, very warm-hearted. But however it happened, I'm very happy to be there and happy to be here tonight.
My name's Chris Martin. I'm the lead innovation and technology solutions attorney at Latham & Watkins. I started my legal career in New York at Aiken Gump, practicing M&A. I left and started my own legal software company, which ended up turning into something else, and then returned to practice of law at Cooley in DC, also practicing M&A, and earlier this year joined Latham. So I lead a team of soon-to-be 4 former practicing attorneys. We're in the technology department, and we're this sort of quick strike team of folks who understand the pressures that our attorneys are facing and can translate those for our quite large technology group.
Hi, Todd Mattson. I'm with Covington. I've been at the firm for about 13 years. I live here and work most of the time in Washington, but I'm lucky enough to have an office in both places. I lead the practice systems and services groups that at Covington consists of our e-discovery and lit support group, the library, all of the firm-wide paralegals, and we have over 100 staff attorneys. The role, I guess I have to think back hard, 14 years ago. The genesis of the role was to address the need for much more sophisticated lit support. The term e-discovery didn't exist at the time, and it has grown from there. We don't have knowledge management per se, but our library and our staff attorneys and the practice support people get involved in projects at a matter-specific level and for particular clients from time to time, and I'll stop there.
And I'm Christian Zust. I am the Regional Innovation Solutions Director for the Americas at Bryan Cave Leighton Paisner. I believe I've held that title for 3 weeks. I came out of school with a JD MBA thinking I would investment bank in 2008. I timed that poorly. And so I went to work as an attorney initially, moved into the e-discovery group when it formed at Bryan Cave to help manage the large e-discovery projects. And a couple years later, the practice economics group, which was focused on internal firm finance and alternative fee arrangements, process improvement, and project management, said they wanted a lawyer who liked spreadsheets, and in the firm there was one. And so I joined them about 7 years ago. 3.5 years ago, I moved away from that into the group that runs the firm's proprietary technology. And most of my job in that role was working directly with our clients to figure out how the technologies that we have combined with some of the technologies out on the market might weave together to solve operational issues. And 3 weeks ago, I moved into the role that I'm in now. We recently merged with Burling, Leighton Paisner, and so now we have the scale to have an internal innovation group, and what I'll be doing is looking to stitch some of the larger non-proprietary technologies that we have together and weave those into the practice.
All right, so I'm incredibly excited. We have a fascinating collection of perspectives to draw on tonight. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground. I want to talk about where law firms actually stand today technologically, where the biggest needs exist and how you identify them and meet them, and what that means for all of us, the various kind of constituencies in the room. And given your deep expertise, we're going to spend a lot of time actually getting very nitty-gritty and specific about certain things. But before we do that, let's take a step back and just set the stage just for like 1 quick minute. There are a ton of people out there, particularly in the legal technology and legal innovation scene, who are very prone to kind of bang their fist on the table and be like, law firms need to change, law firms need to change. But for those of you who are familiar with the statistics and the numbers and the profits, law firms are doing very, very well right now. And if you ask clients, well, there's plenty of situations about which clients are very frustrated. There's plenty of clients that are very happy and very satisfied with the quality of the service they're getting from law firms. So a devil's advocate might ask, well, why do law firms need to change? Why is that important? So let's spend like a quick minute framing this whole conversation, then we'll dive into the weeds. And to kick this off, why don't we, James and Christian, James, you don't represent, a quick health warning for everyone. All of our panelists up here are going to give us their true opinions about things. They are not speaking on behalf of their firms. They're here in their individual capacities to share with us and be a part of the community, okay? So James, you do not represent, but you have spent your time, your professional life, in probably the most prestigious, most white of the white shoe firms in the world at Cravath. Christian, as you just described for us, you worked at a firm where you are taking really affirmative steps to figure out what your clients need technologically, work it into the client service offering, and do things along those lines. So you guys actually kind of represent an interesting kind of spectrum here, not just at this table. Answer that question. Why should law firms be innovative?
I think there's a number of drivers that have led to this kind of resurgence, as it were, of innovation, rhetoric, and actual activity in the legal profession. I mean, some of it is economic, of course. Some of it is the clients organizing post 2008, of course. Economically, the dynamics between the clients and the law firms changed pretty dramatically, and by all accounts, permanently, and that has sort of filtered through to drive a lot of the innovation you're seeing. But as Christian said, there is sort of a subset of the legal world that are not kind of feeling that economic pain, at least not directly, or at least not at a scale that's yet sufficient on its own to drive the level of innovation that I think you're seeing. So, at a firm like Cravath, I think the main impetus is really, Cravath views itself as a leader in the legal industry. I think, we're going to be celebrating our bicentennial next year. Any organization that lasts that long, by definition, has to be pretty adaptable and pretty able to change. And, they've had a quite long legacy of being innovative, obviously not so much in the technology realm when you're talking about the 19th century, but, in other very foundational aspects of how law firms are organized and structured today. Many of them are organized around the Cravath system. So there is a precedent, in a sense, for Cravath's innovation and its legacy in that regard. So I think Cravath approaches this as just a continued approach to changing along with the world and making sure that, okay, we were leaders 100 years ago and 50 years ago, and what do we need to do to maintain that position And in this day and age, I think that's investing and creating new roles and thinking differently about how things have been done in the past.
All right. Christian, if you're not sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the legal market, how do you view that question?
So I appreciate it's a little bit different, maybe at Bryan Cave Leighton Paisner. And, we sort of got lucky in that 20 years ago we had who was going to be the next chair of the firm start a tech project with who was going to be the firm's first chief innovation officer. And they just kind of did it for fun to see, if they could, and they thought they could make a good client solution, and they did. And so then they said, we should do this some more and see if we can get more clients onto this. And it started working, but really 2008 accelerated a lot of this for us. And that's because we saw in our client base for the first time real pressures being put on the in-house legal departments to act more like the rest of the business, who've been Six Sigma'd and Kaizen'd into a lot more efficient position than maybe historically law departments had, at least for the types of work in which we were bidding. And so we were fortunate to have a little bit of a history, and were able to scale some of our technologies from a real pocket team, maybe just in one office, to firm-wide or at least US-wide, and become a solution and part of a solution that made sense more from an operational and business perspective from our clients. And the more we seem to invest in it, the more we seem to find that that's what our clients are wanting us to do, is come in and end-to-end find a problem and solve it. And so, we really have seen in our client base a change and a demand for these things. It's not that they don't see value in the traditional way that legal service and advice was rendered. They just think we might have an opportunity to improve upon it a little bit, leveraging the great tech they see, not only in law, but everywhere else, and the great ideas that seem to be just emanating everywhere this day and age.
Okay, interesting. And then one last kind of stage setting question. So Monet, Chris, Todd, why don't one of you guys just jump in on this? That question about why innovate? Firms are not monoliths. Somebody give us a few words about how different constituencies within law firms, the management committee, the KM staff, the librarians, what are kind of, set the stage for us a little bit, internal politics, why innovate, why do we need tech, why change?
I think with politics and airing dirty laundry, I have a colleague in the room, so if you say anything. Yeah.
Patrick, take that out of the YouTube feed real quick.
Kidding. I think one of the things that, like you said, I think what you were referring to, I think, is a change in appetite. It's not necessarily a disgruntlement entirely with what's going on, but an awareness of the way that things are changing in other industries, and even just the tech that we use as consumers and our access to the ease of use that the appification of everything has given us. For us, I think what we're seeing, as much as the clients' questions to us about what we can do for them vis-a-vis particular problems that don't relate to a matter specifically, but help them in their seating within the company or make them more important to their business, is for us, we're seeing a lot of just an expectation from our own colleagues and the associates coming in. People aren't coming in ready to sit here for the next 8 years, and they're not necessarily dying to make this, not this Covington, but like a law firm life, their full life. And the questions we got immediately from the fall associates who came in last week were just sort of like, cool, like how is that going to make my job more fun? And we just sort of thought that was a thing out there, and a thing that people really at some point might want to get out of a legal career, is more higher value work quicker. But that's a reality, and people are willing to bring it up on their third week at the firm. It's an even more pressing reality than I think we realize. So sort of moving everyone's work up the value chain, making everyone's more interesting, more meaningful for them, is that the ultimate goal of what we're doing? Not necessarily, but it's certainly it's part of the message every time someone comes to us and says, why is this so hard? And they might be talking about their ability to solve a client's legal issue, but I'm sure we've all gotten a similar email, and somewhere in there is buried like a personal complaint about what that's doing for their own day and what that does to their life. And just being in a a world now where well-being really is in the forefront of the way that we think about our approach to everything, cars, clothes, food. That's really palpable in the way that people think about their legal careers. And I think it's incumbent upon us to consider that when we're thinking through innovation.
Yeah, I do think that has a huge impact. And I'm always very fascinated by kind of the human angle on all of this stuff. All right, so Chris and Todd, let's go ahead and dive into the weeds here, start talking brass tacks. And Chris, you have an interesting background in the sense that you left the law and did the entrepreneur thing and worked in the tech world and then came back to it. And Todd, you just, as you said, you've been in your post now for a long time. You've seen this movie before in some respects, I suspect. So for you, what are the most pressing kind of tech or innovation-related needs in law firms today? And maybe even more importantly, how do you go about divining that or sussing that out for yourselves? Like, how do you evaluate it?
Well, I'll start. Pressing tech problems of the day, I'm sorry to say, remains information security and balancing the needs of the information security community within the firm and at our clients with all of the innovation and practice systems that we can do. In the last 5 years, I'd say that one of the biggest vectors we all have to deal with every day is InfoSec and the cost and the tech and the staffing that's associated with that. And it's really often the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Past that, I would encourage you to characterize our innovation and our change challenges as an exploration of the practice groups within these firms. You said firms are not monoliths. That's absolutely true. And in terms of the demand for solutions and the appetite for change and the economic pressures, I mean, my 2 cents is that it's all about practice groups and areas of law and even industry focus groups within those practice groups. They're going to feel pain and they're going to have different appetites for tech and for change and approaching at least a big law firm, an AmLaw 100 firm, as one entity to sell to or to design solutions for is probably not going to get you very far.
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, and I agree. To that point, we recently we get a lot of inbound interest from partners and associates across the firm, and you see really quickly that it's not a monolith. There are the economic conditions in Europe are really different than the economic conditions that our partners are facing here, and some of the things that we can do that have what we consider the greatest impact. It's probably not that huge from a dollars and cents perspective in some ways. Like, we had a practice group in our office in New York, and the lead partner came to us and said, attrition is through the roof because this practice is it's too miserable. Even for Biglaw, this is just, we're torturing these poor associates, and we keep losing folks. And, you recruit attorneys and you're really excited to have them join your group and progress through the ranks, and they just couldn't do it. And Latham was losing them because they burnt out and they left. And so that's one of our biggest internal development projects right now, where there's no product on the market that can do this. It's a sort of niche group. So a vendor probably isn't gonna solve this for us. And so we're getting our internal development team to build a bespoke solution specifically to try to make associates' lives, in this one group, maybe 10% better, so that they can stick it out for a little longer. There's only so much you can do.
It's true. I remember a few groups like that. It's like a revolving door at firms, even where there's not usually a revolving door. All right, I generally don't like to do, I was going to say, let's do this real quick. Like, I generally don't want to have every panelist weigh in on every question, but most pressing need, let's get at least a short answer from everybody.
Yeah, it's funny because I wrote down 2 before I got here, and one was InfoSec, and the other one's equally as unsexy, but data hygiene. I think that half of our day is spent saying, what's the real, where's the actual value for this thing? What's the field where it lives? Which one's the real one? And I think, so it's not tied to any one specific client problem, but it's the root of most of the solutions that we have, and it's big and nasty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, when you're talking about what's the most pressing, I think of that in terms of what are the problems that are going to take the longest to fix. And I do think that the data problem in law firms is the biggest one because, obviously a lot of this emerging technology is driven by data. If your data to date is not suitable for that purpose, you got to start collecting it now. So even if you spend the time now to get your data collection in order, or try and retroactively clean up, it's still going to be years of accumulating that data before you're in a position to actually start using it for anything. So even if the ex-associate in me wants to focus on the pain points, the acute sort of practice-facing stuff, I personally have to try and force myself to keep as a priority those kind of foundational data architecture layer type issues and make sure that those are on the right track, because I know I'm going to have a 2 or 3 or 4 year period where that data is just accumulating, that I can go back and deal with the other stuff. But I've got to get that sort of sorted and accumulating before I can move on.
That's really interesting. And Christian, what do you think? What's your number one?
I'm going to sound a little like a broken record. I echo the data piece. It's pretty amazing that we can tell with great accuracy what everyone's done in 6-minute increments for 30 years, but we can't tell what maybe the most pressing issue on any given matter was just at a glance or in a database. And there's a lot of really great vendors who are aggregating things outside of the firm, but a lot of the really great info that we have access to that outside can't have access to. And so inherently is where we can derive advantage, ironically, is what we've locked away the furthest. So figuring out how to structure that, unlock it, and make something meaningful out of it is really where there's a lot of untapped opportunity.
Yeah, those are all super interesting answers. James, your answer is actually a great segue to the next question. So I know from my own experience, being an associate at a top law firm for years, you don't have to look around to find lots of complaints. There's plenty of things wrong. Oh, I wish we did this differently, or I wish we did this better. So I'm sure if you were to create a list of what could we fix, it would be very long. How do you, given your roles, how do you evaluate which of those problems on that list are the ones you actually should fix and should fix now? So you gave us a great example in terms of how long is it going to take to fix the problem. What are the other yardsticks and ways that you separate out the wheat from the chaff in terms of what you need to solve today? This one's open. Who wants to jump in?
Is there an interested client that will pay for it? I mean,
that does get it to the top of the list every time.
That's for the top of the list. And second would be an interested partner who wants to make time available to participate. Those are going to be drivers that get our attention very quickly.
I think we're lucky enough to be a few years into a very clear and well-articulated 2020 firm strategy, and so I think that's one of our go-tos, is just to constantly look at the firm strategy and say, is this in any way connected to one of those focal points in the strategy? Is it connected to one of the practice groups that's been deemed the priority, or to one of the regions that's been deemed the priority? So it's nice to sort of have that arbiter sitting out there, because we would love to fix everything, and some of the things that aren't necessarily tied to strategy are more fun, but we're in a business, we're here to make money, and so it's sort of what's the thing that gets us money, whether it's a client paying for it, or where the leaders have determined this is where we want to be making money. Is it tied to that?
Yeah, interesting. All right, Chris, kick us off. The next, I want to go from here to, so once you've identified that thing, either as a client driver or an HR concern, or whatever the case may be, here's the thing we know we want to try to fix. Let's talk for a minute about how you actually implement and innovate, particularly tech-driven innovation. How does it actually happen in the market? What are the most compelling kind of arguments that carry the weight internally if you want to try to get people on board with something? What are the steps that are involved? Clearly it's not like, oh, this is a good idea. It's a partnership, right? It's difficult to get things done inside of law firms. How do you get it done?
Well, so mechanically, our first step usually is one of the innovation attorneys actually spends time in that group, experiences the, whatever the problem is, and tries to get one of us tries to get a really deep understanding of the issue, and, we try to start working on what solutions could be. We're lucky that we have a COO who, as far as I can tell, wields a ton of authority in the firm. And so while we're very consensus-driven, as I think most law firms are, there are some folks who can sort of cut through that. And Leanne has given us a lot of autonomy and money to solve the issues that we think we can and that we can do, that we can solve well. And then, the next step is trying to figure out, is this something that we're going to have to do internally, which we'd prefer not to, or is there a vendor out there who can solve it for us?
Does anyone else have a different take on kind of what you need to do, kind of step one, you identify the right problem to solve, how am I going to get this done internally?
I think it's so dependent on a couple things. One, the internal structure of your firm, but more importantly, I think with these new roles. I mean, every time I meet someone in one of these new legal tech roles, we sit in like completely different places in the org chart of these firms, and that I think goes a long way to determining your path to success. If you are particularly, I think Cravath is Biglaw, but in terms of size, we're actually not that big. We've got 500 lawyers. We're almost entirely New York centric, and so sort of all the decision makers are an elevator ride away. And so it's, I think, frankly, that's a bit of an advantage for us over some of the even larger firms that do sort of have to, go through layers of bureaucracy. At least in my experience, I'm able to sort of sit down with the people and have a conversation and just sort of work your way through the chain until it gets done.
Right. Here's another, Todd.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think your question really is dependent upon the nature and scope of the project. If you're talking about how is a big law firm going to select and implement its next document management system, that's going to involve lots of people and lots of money and lots of consensus. And there are thankfully only a few players to choose from at this point. Contrast that with a matter-specific or a business process-specific solution for a particular client where you have a champion partner and the client's willing to pay. Those two projects are so organically different that I'm not sure that there's one answer to your question. You need champions either way, but for the matter-specific problem, you need the relationship partner on that client to want to do it. And for a new email system or a new archiving system or a new document management system, you need everybody involved.
All right, let's look at it from the other side. What, in your opinion, is either the most important or the least understood obstacle to either change in terms of deciding to do something, or even adoption? If you do it and you try to get something out, but you got to get people to change what they're doing and start using new tools or whatever the case may be. What are those things lurking behind the curtain that that can really torpedo a project that people sitting in this room might not understand?
Firm culture.
Yeah, that's certainly a big one. I think one of the biggest surprises to me was just how much planning actually you're going to have to do anything at scale. Most of the early part of what I talked about, what I had been doing, we might call pocket innovation. You get to do really neat things with maybe small groups or really motivated partners, maybe newer in their career, looking to establish their book of business. Figuring out how to actually incorporate solutions that maybe appear to be bespoke and custom, and you can make them do whatever you want, but really you've thought through it and have found ways to configure them so that lawyers who practice differently from each other can implement them. That is a real challenge, and the amount of time it takes to think through that is something that really surprised me as I got into scaling more than a pocket.
I think that for us it's very similar. We use this term that we need to be able to operationalize whatever we do for everyone. So the goal is, if we were to launch something, whether maybe it's like a non-point solution AI tool, right? One of those Swiss Army knives that you can kind of point at any problem. We want to be able to give it to anyone who picks up the phone in the firm and wants to use it. That means for us 44 offices, 29 countries, and frankly, a lot of the service providers in this space just don't understand what that takes, and we've done a lot of work to try to help them mature to the level where they can serve an enterprise of our size. But that's been pretty painful, and I think for both for the firm and for the providers, an area that we just haven't, in some cases, yes, but in many cases just haven't understood. And we're in an area right now, just a lot of this back and forth education about it, what it takes to do that for someone as hard as we are.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and in fact, it's an answer to the next question I wanted to tee up. So let's take it to others. What's the number? If you decided to buy as opposed to build, you're out in the market, you're considering vendors. What's the number one reason why a vendor doesn't cut it, and you have to cut it loose and stop a process?
I mean, for us, a lot of the time it's security-related concerns. And there's really, we have an internal team that's going to do a whole bunch of pen tests and security audits and on, and really make life miserable for that vendor for a surprisingly long time. But we have no choice. Our clients do the same thing to us, and all that pressure just gets funneled right down onto each vendor that we do business with. So that's been a frustrating part of the process from my perspective, because we'll find this great solution and then months later they're still leaky or something like that. I don't know what the right term is, but and to that end, we've actually joined that consortium, Rain in Court, and we're trying to help create a solution for that, and I guess it's a private company, but led by a whole bunch of law firms. Latham's involved, and the idea is to create essentially private cloud as a service. So vendors will be able to plug in, and as law firms will know that if they're plugged in, the security's all good. All you have to do is evaluate the vendor for its features and capabilities.
Any other number one reasons you don't move forward with vendors, people at the table?
It goes without saying to a certain extent, but compatibility with the rest of the ecosystem technologically. I mean, for better or worse, law firms are all a bit of a patchwork of different systems from different eras, and I sympathize with the vendors trying to fit into that in many cases. I mean, I think you see increasingly the vendors' approach is to just try and go to the cloud and short circuit around those problems. But I think, as Chris alluded to, the firms, or I would argue, frankly, the clients are not quite there yet in many cases, and so some of these vendors, I think, are just stuck in the middle. They don't. It's not, frankly, worth their time to invest to try and make their stuff backwards compatible with every permutation of law firm environment. But can they wait long enough for everyone else to catch up to the cloud, essentially?
Well, let's go ahead and tack on a sub-question here. What is the future of on-prem infrastructure at these top law firms that have banking clients? He's going to step up.
We had someone from J.P. Morgan here. Should we ask them?
Yeah.
Well, it's my understanding the banks themselves use plenty of cloud infrastructure. It's just they don't let the law firms do it. Is that right? All right, but what is the serious question? Because it really does drive so much of the technological ecosystem. What is the future of the on-prem, the patchwork infrastructure that James is talking about, the legacy stuff that really is still the backbone of how firms manage information?
I mean, it's already lasted too long to one extent or another, and it's frustrating. One misconception is that firms would prefer to be on-prem as opposed to in the cloud, when it really is almost entirely client-driven, and it's something that we have constant conversations. Like Barclays, for instance, was part of the Google Cloud keynote. They bragged about how they threw all their data up into Google Cloud and everything's amazing. And from what I understand in our engagement letter, we're forbidden from ever putting any of their data in the cloud. So there's not much we can do aside from continue conversations with them. It's also a little amusing just because all of our systems I can access through my phone or my laptop wherever I am in the world. So sort of distinguishing between a Google Cloud and AWS and our supposedly on-prem system is a little bit of a misnomer. Ours is also cloud. It's just maintained by Latham as opposed to a gigantic third-party provider.
Yeah.
I guess I'll add that it's just a question of time. I mean, I'm old. I've been doing this for 25 years. And if your question is, will AmLaw 100 firms have substantial infrastructure on-prem 5 years from now? Yes. 25 years from now? No. The economics of it just don't work. And the banks will be there, and the pharma will be there, and the government will be there, and then we'll catch up.
All right. One thing we can never get away from in legal tech, all tech verticals, but legal tech specifically, we spend way too much time talking about frontier technology, and we spend way too much time focused on buzz and optics and press releases. We've got an incredible cross-section of the market sitting at this table in front of us. Tell us, even if you can't talk about your firm specifically or you can't name names, you guys know, what are big law firms actually using today? Not just put out a press release because they did a pilot and they, whatever, or maybe it's servicing 5 clients. What are they actually using?
SharePoint.
That's not the end.
Yeah, I know. But I will say that things that you could throw into there have taken a bit more traction, and I think that's some of the questions that we look at things like engagement tools or so forth, and the first question is, can we throw it in SharePoint? So, SharePoint. But I think most people by now do have some sort of due diligence AI-powered point solution, the penetration of which is dubious in some cases, but yes, I think it's funny, I was at a conference in London with DLA, and they were pretty frank, and it was lovely of them to be this honest, but they said that they're using Cura to probably 1% of its capabilities in their firm. But it was, I think it's time that we kind of all just kind of say, yeah, like I've only been able to get this many deals or this many live deals and this many lookbacks. But I think most people probably do have something like a Cura.
Christian, I saw you potentially weighing in here.
Yeah. So what I see a lot of is different categories that people are moving into. So artificial intelligence pointed at due diligence for sure. Everyone has e-discovery tools as well. I think we're also seeing a movement towards some of these applications that had been really good discreetly. So expert systems are not necessarily new to law. Document automation, certainly not new to law. Extranets, certainly not new to law. I think we're seeing firms now starting to figure out how can we stitch these things together. And so I think where we're seeing trending isn't necessarily in that people are buying whole new classifications of systems, or at least not just buying them only to have them. They're thinking, how can we put these together, and what technologies can help wrap them together. And so that's been a lot of our focus lately, is not so much moving into different domains, but figuring out how the domains work together.
I would say one area that's definitely real is the analytics. And I mean, you could quibble whether that's legal tech. I'm talking about the third-party providers that aggregate Edgar or Pacer and allow you to ask questions that manually would have taken 2 months to answer. That universe of tools, without naming any names, but I think we all know who we're talking about. That is real. That is creating value. That is allowing people to approach a class of question that there was no feasible way to answer before. And almost to the point where I think it's like everything. It's like once it becomes integrated into the workflow, you stop thinking of it as emerging tech and therefore not eligible for an answer to a question like this. But I think you back 3 years ago, 5 years ago, those questions didn't have answers, and now I think they're just part of the workflow in many cases.
Excellent. All right, let's move on to either the future or what we've talked about so far kind of means for us, and then I want to make sure I leave enough time to get some questions from the audience, because we have an incredible group of folks sitting out there as well as up here tonight. Really quickly, I'm sure that people in the room are more familiar with the statistics, but the statistics are pretty jarring if you look at what law firm, what percentage of the budget that law firms spend on their technology and developing their infrastructure, what might be R&D spend in other industries and things. It's pretty abysmal by orders and orders of magnitude, 10x below, that sort of thing, or 10x above the other way, I guess. What's your take on what's likely to happen to internal technology budgets at law firms over the next 5-10 years?
They're going to go up. And depending upon the area of law and the client, the industry client base, they're going to go up a lot.
You think so?
I do. I mean, I think if you look at the employment law firms, and I won't name any names, but their investment in frontline service delivery with expert systems is far better than anybody sitting up here. Depends on the client. It depends on the industry. It depends on the demand. But as a, what's it take to run a law firm? Professional salaries, real estate, and tech spending. And tech's a distant third. It's got nowhere to go but up.
I'd agree. They're going up, and they're in some ways that I guess are a little bit unexpected. And part of that, I think, for our team and our group is salaries that support the tax. I think people kind of thought you could buy a certain type of person to support this work, and quickly realize that there's a different type of person necessary, and it costs.
Yes, we're much more valuable.
Much more valuable. And also, this reminds me of, I think I was remiss in missing this in the last question, but the legal tech that goes into research. I think that's one where everyone's taken advantage of it. And I think we forget because we're not participatory in building the tech. There's no involvement on our side other than just to consume what comes from it. So the amount of resources that are available in that space are increasing, and we're seeing a bigger demand for sort of things like Lex Machina and Kara and so forth. So even if it's just what is sitting in what you think of the library budget, I think it's growing there. And then again, the resources necessary to support the tech.
All right, I'm going to do one last lightning round all the way down the table, and then we're going to do some audience questions. Last question. I'm looking around the room, and I see lots of kind of interesting kind of internal change makers at law firms, and I see a number of people who are trying outside of law firms, building vendor style, also trying to make change from the outside. Leave us in 30 seconds, each of you, with one insight for one of those two groups of people. Prescriptively, based on what we've been talking about tonight, what's something they should take away in terms of if they want to help law firms innovate, what should they be doing?
I think one thing, going back to my comment about the cloud, realize that we want to be as innovative as you want us to be. Even our lawyers want to be, and we're under pressure that we then put down onto you, the vendor, that we don't find optimal either. It's really frustrating internally, but there's just nothing we can do about it. And so the question is, can we figure out a workaround where we get to keep our client and use your software? Because only one of those is optional.
Other quick advice: internal change makers, external change makers. What should they do?
I mean, I've said it before. Whenever I'm talking to vendors, and it's persevere. We all know the legendary lag involved in law firm procurement and the aforementioned approval processes and so forth. And I know that's a perpetual source of frustration for many on the vendor side. Even if it doesn't look like anything is happening, things are happening as long as you've got a champion waiting for their moment, as it were. I'm on the cusp of rolling something out that I first wanted to roll out 2 years ago. And it's taken that long for a combination of technology and internal logistics and wrangling to make that happen. And I sympathize with the vendor who has now branded me as, the boy who cried wolf kind of thing. Boy who cried bye, I guess. But things are happening even if it doesn't look like it.
Excellent. Anything else?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So a lot of the vendors, particularly small tech startups, have a fail fast forward culture. It makes a lot of sense if you're 20 people or 100 people. Think about the fact that is probably not the culture of the law firm that you're selling into. Again, I said culture earlier. I would say focus your efforts on practice areas or areas of law, not the whole firm in general. Give away your product for the first 90 days, because if it's that good, then we'll buy it. Squarespace, I think, is a good example, right? It's free, and they have an incredible uptake rate. And culture. Align your product with culture and expect a long sales cycle.
Good.
And I guess along those same lines is just I hate to admit it, but we're grown-ups. And then so I sometimes have this conversation with some of our service providers, and I use that word instead of vendors because that in many cases their SaaS platforms are giving us a service, but don't necessarily think through what it's like to serve a really big law firm. And so I have the customer success bell on my desk, and I just kind of bring it on every conversation with service providers. And I'm like, if you don't have a customer success team, get one. I'm happy to talk to you about what we want from you. But and then if that doesn't sound like something you wanted to do, then maybe we're not the kind of people you want to sell to, and that's fine as well. We're not. It's like you said. The sales cycle may not be what everyone was envisioning when they left their practice to go start up something at WeWork. I get that, but if you decided to sell to someone like us, we need to have your help 24/7. We need to have your guidance. We need for you to think best practices. And happy to, I think for both of us on either side of the table, I've just been really encouraging us all to sort of make that demand of our service providers and encouraging our service providers to try to fill fast in that area. They're really happy to take risks when it comes to features and development, but it's rare that they say, hey Mo, like I thought of this onboarding plan, what do you think of it? Do you want to try it with the next set of people that come here? And we're always the ones going to them and saying, can you help us build you an onboarding plan you could eventually take to others. So I think we can help each other sort of mature in that space.
Christian, did you?
I guess the only thing I'd add, I agree with everything everybody said. If I was a vendor looking to penetrate law firms today, try and figure out how to make it so a lot of firms have some amount of proprietary technology, and everyone has a different combination of different tools that they've been using. The technologies we've implemented most successfully have been those that have invested in their APIs and making it so they can work in that structure. So showing me how you can work in that structure and be flexible so that I can help scale to as many different problems as possible is really, really important.
Excellent. All right. I want to make sure we give you guys time to ask some questions. I know people have them. We're going to do our best to get them through the mics. I'll run it, and Rick, maybe you can help me run it. If we can't get the mic to you, speak loudly, and panelists repeat the questions into the microphones. Charlie?
Thanks, Kristen. So I know James has said that each of you is in different, or maybe in different parts of the org chart. And Todd had said try freemiums to get people to use it for free. And you had talked, Christian, about being able to integrate with APIs. But here I am a startup, or I once was and failed. To whom do I go at a law firm? On whose door do I knock? How do I find the email? Is it you people? Is it the chairman of the firm? I doubt it. Is it a particular? On whose door do I knock to get in and talk to the people who will work with me to help me make the right decisions to successfully sell the?
Yeah, I mean, again, there will be, obviously, this is the nature of the problem with all of us being in different places in the org chart and having different kind of levels of sway. I would say as a general matter, I think the old model of targeting the partners and hoping that results in a mandate down to the technology department, I think is outdated. I think it reflects an era when that was the relationship between the technology department and the legal department. The technologists waited to be told what the lawyers needed, and they would execute on that. And that was really the extent of the relationship. I think the existence of our roles reflects the changing dynamic between those two departments. And I would argue that really, speaking for myself, and I suspect for some of the other people on the panel, it's part of our job to be more proactive and bring solutions to understand the problems by virtue of being a lawyer at that firm or otherwise, and being able to proactively be a first pass filter and bring some of these solutions forward where you really think is going to add value. So I would definitely say you can identify someone with innovation in their title or someone who wasn't on the org chart 3 or 4 years ago, not to take anything away from Todd, of course, just because he was ahead of the curve, don't exclude him. But, I do think there is this wave of new roles that have emerged in recent times whose one of their core functions is to serve that role. So I would start there.
Yeah, I'll just add, it depends on your solution, right? Librarians probably a good way in. I agree 100% that the partner's probably not the best at this point in time. There was a time when that was the right approach, but maybe the person to sell to is the in-house lawyer at JPMC or Pfizer. Right.
As we said, if you get the client telling the partner that they want it, that will result in a mandated.
Other questions?
How much do law firms need to innovate versus like alternative service providers? Where is the real innovation coming from? Are you scared of other service providers, or do you think law firms need to adapt and they will still keep the market as it is today? And I want maybe each one of you 30 seconds.
We're all in law firms, you realize, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen them sort of, come into our sphere, and they bid against us for like due diligence pieces of large M&A transactions. So we're responding to them, and we're trying to. That's one of the external pressures that interests us in stuff like Kira, which otherwise just reduces the billable hours that we can throw at our client. So. I think their business model may be more innovative than ours, but I'm not sure that technologically over the medium or long term they're going to be significantly more innovative than we will be.
And I would just add I think the threat or how imminent the threat is from alternative legal service providers, we really have to distinguish among different tiers of law firms at different practice areas. There's certain types of work that lend themselves to that, and there are other types that don't, at least given where technology is at today. So I don't think you can't answer generally for firms versus alternative service providers. I think you really have to distinguish at a more granular level, what piece of the work are we talking about, and what does your firm do that might be at risk.
Other questions?
Yeah, I agree, but you should read Clayton Christensen's book if you haven't. It's old at this point, but still true. It probably answers your question better than anything else on the market right now.
Yes, good evening. My name is Fabian. I'm the Vice President at the Columbia Legal Tech Association. And I wanted to know, in your experience, are the lawyers at your firms well equipped to apply the legal tech solutions that are out there? And in addition, what additional skills do you deem important for the lawyer 2.0? Thank you.
And how big is your organization now?
It's huge. It's growing.
So you guys have a couple hundred kids, right? Yeah, it's very impressive. We're very happy about Columbia having a lot of student-driven, lots of legal tech.
I think it's strange. They're generally not very well equipped, and I'm not sure whose fault that is. We're both from Cooley. We had a very startup-focused culture there, and lots of lawyers who I think are probably like frustrated developers and probably wanted to have their clients' jobs. And even those guys who knew a lot about their clients' tech didn't quite have humility is the wrong word, but it's probably the right word. The ability to say, like, I don't know, and listen to someone tell them how it works in this space. There's a lot of, a lot of us are former lawyers and really think we can figure everything out. And for some cases, it's just a situation where you just have to say, look, I know how I do it now. I'm good at expressing how I do it now, and I'm going to listen to you tell me how this tech can connect with that. But I think where we've had trouble is people just sort of like, shh, I know what I'm doing. Just let me log in. Let me do it. Let me screw it up. And in 2 weeks, have you come in and fix the problem. So I think part of it is just not being able to express what their workflow is, whether because that exposes something that they're embarrassed to talk about, and then not being able to allow us as the bridge between the two areas, explain how this will affect that workflow and how we can optimize it. I don't know how you train for that, other than just maybe having people in law schools talk about the actual workflow, not just the analysis of a legal problem. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to break law school.
I'll echo that I don't think the way law has been practiced traditionally has lawyers prepared to just pick up tech and start running with it. And so we set up a number of really deliberate programs to help our existing attorney base acclimate technology into their practice. If it's our associate base, once they learn how to practice law, as opposed to think like a lawyer in law school, we teach them how do you practice law and think about things like efficiency and how tech can help in that, but not alter the advice that you're ultimately giving. And then, I think a lot of it is programs like those that are co-opted with law schools and then sort of changing the dynamic of the student experience a little bit so they realize that practicing as a lawyer is evolving a little bit and does incorporate technology, does incorporate process that'll help get lawyers equipped more quickly as they enter into law practice.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Play, and I currently work at an email security startup, sort of working with law firms. And I guess I'm really curious about the ecosystem of your sort of buying in general. How much information sharing happens sort of amongst firms? And when one firm adopts a technology platform, do you find it kind of happening across the ecosystem, or is that not so much the case?
I laugh. I mean, it's no secret, I think, that the law firms like to move together. Just see the compensation scale if you need evidence of that. And certainly I think in the New York big law firms, there remains a certain degree of comfort that's derived from the decision makers from, knowing that other people have taken the leap and had a good experience, or it hasn't otherwise blown up and they're no longer in their position. So yes, I think in short, there's through various formal and informal channels, a fair degree of information sharing. And I do think there is a benefit to being able to get kind of an anchor client in a certain tier of firm. I do think, rightly or wrongly, I think you can debate whether that's the right approach and whether, I think in some cases that limits firms, maybe not willing to take as much of a risk as they might just because no one else has done it yet. And I think it's part of our role as the innovators to try and get over that in some cases. But the short answer to your question is yes, it happens, and I think it is still an important factor.
And I'd say that, so the sharing happens big time. And I think half of my email distribution lists are like these little lists that are me and two people at another law firm talking about this tiny product I even forgot existed. It's insane. But I think where the sharing happens the best is in an ecosystem that the service provider creates for themselves. So a good example is HiQ. They have a really great user community, which for me has eclipsed any other way of getting information about HiQ. And so if that's a concern of yours, I'd encourage you to build a user community as quickly as possible. Make it something people go to figure out how to do something, and then a place where they want to talk about how it gets used. Because it's going to happen regardless, and I think it's best for you to make it the place that you want it to happen.
Can I add a quick follow-up to that? To what extent do you think firms who are looking to find technology and it doesn't currently exist what they really want, to what extent do you think firms have appetite to do things together or on an open source basis or on a limited consortium basis versus kind of seeing competition around every corner, including on the technological fronts? Do you guys see, Chris, you mentioned Rain in Court earlier. Do you see that being an important trend in the future? Do you think law firms will continue to kind of look around and they're doing it, now we got to do it because it's a race as opposed to...
Yeah, I mean, we're still competitive about everything, but I think there are some places like, security standards for startups. That's a perfect space for firms to just come together, say, look, if you meet this bar, all of us at least are able to buy your product and to bring you in-house. We're also part of the global legal blockchain consortium, and that's another place where I have no idea what the applications are going to be, but getting a whole bunch of, trust me, I know, but getting a whole bunch of stakeholders together to say, let's just set some standards and then we'll operate within this universe. It's a place where we don't have to be competitive for once. But there are obviously other fields, like tools like here, all the diligence tools would presumably be better if all of us trained provisions, then shared that up, and then we all got the benefit. And everyone in my firm will, I'll get fired if I suggest that, because that's the application of our attorneys' knowledge and experience, and that's the most valuable thing we have. So and I'm sure I would doubt anyone up here would be willing to share that.
Thank you. My question is kind of a derivative of the earlier question that was asked, but I think generally phrased, it would be, how do you think that technology is going to affect Biglaw as an institution? And I guess I have two arguments or thoughts about how it may, one theoretical, one more practical. So if we look at kind of like Ronald Coase's theory of transactional economics, and he explains why people organize in firms to begin with on the basis of a cost-benefit analysis of being able to bring in activities in-house, and then we see technology which is fundamentally lowering those transaction costs, which would make you would lead you to think that as technology lowers transaction costs, the reason for organizing in firms would decrease. And now bringing it to the more kind of practical example, I think many people in this room, was a former associate at a big law firm, and I was quickly taken by the fact that many of the tasks that I was doing, I thought were easily automatable. And I'm talking about things like benchmarking, discovery, diligence. So in a world where there's technical solutions for all those problems, in a world where transaction costs are much lower, can the Biglaw institution survive? And I guess by that I mean like a highly leveraged institution that has leveraged in terms of demographics, not finances, but that has like a high attrition rate. And like, are you going to be able to bring in 120 summer associates if no one's going to be willing to pay them to do diligence, basically? And what does the world look like in that sense?
We can all speculate. I do agree. Almost by definition, if you're moving work up the value chain by introducing technology, there's less work to do at the bottom of the value chain. And insofar as some firms are very highly leveraged in the sense that you mean, which for those who may not know the law firm lingo basically means the ratio of associates to partners, I do think you're going to see a narrowing of the pyramid in a sense over time, where right now you've got a very broad base and the business model's based on everybody leaving before they get to the top of the pyramid. I think you'll see fewer people coming in at the bottom. And I think the firms will be doing more of that high value work. And it might be, say, the legal alternative legal service providers or other entities that pick up that slack in that workforce that will operate under a different model. Yeah, you can imagine that kind of a change occurring.
Hi, I'm Şeyma Yurduseven. One common theme in all your comments was that you need a good data analytics and management team, considering that a big lack was in data management, analytics, aggregation, considering how nightmarish is it in legal area. I wanted to ask you, as a person who is going to look for a job in data analytics, like in a year or so, especially in a legal firm, what skills are you looking for? What should we improve ourselves in?
I'd say what's classically known as business analysis. So sort of understanding, like to use the Tableau language, is sort of what the stories are that people want to tell with the data, and understanding how to ask the kind of questions that codify what that story is, so that you can use the data to tell the story. But I think a lot of people they know that they can pull you a pattern, or they can pull you a model, but they don't really know why, and they're not great at digging into the why, and the people who need that information aren't necessarily great at expressing the why. So I think it's probably better suited for your side of the table to be able to sort of dig into that and really understand what the stories are that people want to tell with the data.
I mean, it's echoing that a little bit, but I would say communication skills, which is maybe a bit counterintuitive, but I think, the need is great, and I don't think law firms' needs are particularly unique when it comes to the data analytics field. It's not like we need some really esoteric mathematical expertise beyond what anyone with expertise in that field learns. I think that the more limiting factor is finding people who can be successful in a law firm environment where, for better or worse, communication skills are critical. That's just, lawyers are very judgmental about that sort of thing, as we can all attest, and anyone who's had something marked up by an associate before. So I think it's counterintuitive, but for people in the technical arena trying to move into law firms, I think that's an area that's often neglected, but shouldn't be.
And I'll just add real quickly on the other side of the spectrum there. We focus a lot on maybe a data scientist or what somebody who's a whiz in business application and analysis does, and rightfully so. That's where all the really, really neat stuff that makes the headlines come out. But the amount of work and skill that it takes for someone to take the mess that a lot of law firms' data sits in right now and untangle it and get it ready for that person who then knows how to analyze it and come out with learnings on the other side, there is real opportunity there. I don't know that it's very well appreciated just how big of an effort that tends to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know we have a few people who have to catch trains. I am hopeful that we can continue networking for a while until the fine folks at Covington kick us out, in 15, 20 minutes. But please join me in a huge round of applause for this amazing panel.